Cathy Brooks, once again, outside the Arriaga Alumni Center at the AlwaysOn Innovation Summit. This time, speaking with Mike Arrieta from Sony. A pleasure to talk with you today.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, innovation, what's it mean to you?
I think innovation can mean a lot of things, but for me, kind of living at the kind of world of entertainment technology and trying to figure out essentially how do you become relevant in a changing age? How do you actually modify and grow and develop new things that are effectively relevant to the consumer population? I mean, really focused on consumer propositions and where technology is going to go, where storytelling goes, where business models go. And I think innovation's kind of the people who are innovative are the ones who can recognize the future and kind of live on the bleeding edge and figure out not what status quo is today, but how do you actually take the next step towards that risky proposition, the investment in technology, the trying a new business, the trying a new proposition, and having some of the courage, I guess, to say, we're going to try this, and it's okay to fail. And you better succeed more than you fail, because then you're not going to have the opportunity to innovate.
Right.
But it's really the courage to make changes and address needs and provide solutions.
Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead sort of thing.
Full steam ahead.
You talk about the energy involved in innovation, and that leads to the people who innovate, who are the entrepreneurs, the young and hungry ones coming up with these technologies. Sony interacts with companies of all shapes and sizes, especially entrepreneurial ones. So how have you seen entrepreneurs change over time?
Well, I think the whole world is much more entrepreneurial than it has been in the past. There's so much rapid change in technology. I think people are forced to change at a pace that it greatly outdistances how it's been, in years gone by. So it used to just be the really young people, mostly because they don't have anything to lose, and so they're trying to make their way in the world. And that would be where innovation would happen, and where the serial entrepreneurs would come in, and they'd have new ideas, and they would be trying to buck the system to create something new because they didn't have as much that's established. What's more interesting today is I think really established players and really established companies are being forced to innovate. And innovation can't just be from the youngest people. You can't just keep having new kids from high school and college come in and bet the farm on them. You actually have to put something into the culture all the way through that we're going to be an entity, or I'm going to be a person that's going to be looking forward. So you get a change now in 40-year-old people trying to be innovative. There's, of course, the serial entrepreneurs that were the high school kids who keep innovating and keep creating new businesses. That, of course, exists. But I think there's a wholesale change in general where a larger class of people are trying to figure out the next thing. You're always going to have the young, hungry, right out of school, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people. And I think it's really great for business and great for business models that those people exist. It's how do they function once they get into big, static corporate cultures that generally don't change as quickly. And so the fun for me is to see entrepreneurial nature in the Silicon Valley and others, where lots of venture funding, lots of new people with new ideas and trying to get things off the ground, but then having them start to attach to motherships, real established businesses, and then use that as a catalyst for change. And then have that continue, because you have to continually innovate and you have to be an entrepreneur at kind of all levels in the organization. And to me, what's exciting is the companies with CEOs that are innovators, that are entrepreneurial at heart, those are the ones that are ultimately the most successful. Microsoft is very successful because they innovate. Sony's been successful because it innovates. New companies like Google, they're reinventing new products and services all the time. It's not just one service, it's not just one thing, it's continuous. And that has to be in the culture. So I fancy myself somewhat of an entrepreneur inside of a large company, and I think that a lot more people actually do take that entrepreneurial spirit and move it forward. And I think that causes a lot of great things to happen for us.
What product or technology has been the most a surprise to you? So either something that you thought, what the hell is that was actually successful, or something that you thought really had some promise that just couldn't get ahead of steam?
Well, it is kind of in between. My favorite product of all time is TiVo. right? And
What did we do before TiVo?
You know, we're lost. We were lost.
I don't understand.
And we put money into TiVo. We backed it early from the Sony Corporation, and I was involved in that. And we saw a great product that we knew would revolutionize the way people watch television and the way they're entertained. What's more interesting to me, though, is that it hasn't become as pervasive as it is in concept. So there's still only several million people that have that. It's not like a television where 90 million, 100 million households have it. So it's a great technology that still isn't really getting to mass adoption. It's mass adoption in the press. It's mass adoption for a certain
geeky people like
geeky
us,
people,
yeah.
But it's still not the first thing that people buy in, you know, the Midwest or basic, you know. I don't know. I think it's a confusing proposition. For some, it's the type of proposition, though, that once you've used it, you can't live without it. So when I look at new products that come in and new services, they're great propositions, but then you always benchmark it against TiVo. How do you actually make it ubiquitous? How do you make it mass market? And the fact that that product hasn't become mass market, except for mass aware, it's very aware, but not every household has it. So the other thing that I think is pretty interesting for me is what we're talking about today is just the amount of web video and the involvement of users, which we always knew was going to be big. We have been betting on it to be big. It's how fast it became big after we had it pent up waiting for it to be big for a number of years. And back in 2000, 2001, we were betting on user-generated video, web video was coming, and then really it's been in the last 3 months that it's just got hypergrowth. So the speed of which it's come onto the market has surprised me. The fact that it came, you know, with a force, I was more surprised of how long it took. But now that's become ubiquitous. So if you look at TiVo versus YouTube, and you know, there's two types of companies, they're both about how you experience media.
But you were talking about YouTube and TiVo, and I think you bring up an interesting point about, you know, mass adoption. Silicon Valley, we live in a pretty cloistered community. I think we fancy ourselves to be a bit more widespread mass adoption sometimes than we actually are. There have been efforts to take the Silicon Valley culture and transplant it in other places, and it hasn't really been successful. Why do you think that is?
Well, there, you know, of course, in certain cases, you could say, you know, you could innovate anywhere. I think there's an ecosystem, you know, off of Sand Hill Road and you know, close up here in the valley where technologies flourish, and there's you know, established ways that it happens, and there's certainly reasons for trying to launch it in New York or LA or Chicago or here. And I think ultimately the place where you are isn't really what's going to define your success. I think it's really going to still be the people. You know, you can certainly be very successful anywhere. What I like about the Valley is people are constantly trying to innovate. I mean, it is in the very fabric of how businesses are formed. Everyone here is out to innovate. And that's kind of a unique ecosystem that you don't necessarily see in more established places. And I think that'll probably continue, but you're starting to see a lot of smaller startups start to percolate in various places. You know, what I'm really waiting for is something big to pop out of really low rent areas, right? Places like Madison, Wisconsin, which doesn't cost a lot of money to live there, but has a great university,
great
cheese. And I think over time we'll see more innovation from those areas as well. I think technology becoming you know, making things easier to work from multiple locations is going to cause it to not necessarily need to be in clustered centers. And I think you're going to see a lot more innovation for a lot of places.
Excellent. Well, Mike Arrieta from Sony, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For taking the time to chat with me today.
Great, thanks.
Cathy Brooks here in the, I don't know how many more sounds we're going to have here.
A couple more.
Maybe more. And maybe we'll have a contest and you can try to guess what the sounds are. But definitely come back. We'll have some more speakers a little bit later.